In the heart of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, 42-year-old Amish farmer Jacob Miller struggles to keep his family's century-old farm afloat after losing his wife Sarah to illness 2 years ago. Left to raise his 10-year-old daughter Emma alone while managing mounting debts, Jacob discovers an advertisement for an old barn being sold for just 50 cents by the county due to back taxes. Desperate for additional storage and hoping to expand his modest carpentry business, Jacob purchases the abandoned barn on the outskirts of his community. But when he enters the dilapidated structure for the first time, he hears labored breathing coming from the darkness within, breathing that sounds neither human nor animal. What Jacob discovers inside will not only challenge his faith and understanding of the world, but will ultimately teach him that sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as our deepest fears, and that love can transcend the boundaries between species, bringing healing to broken hearts in the most unexpected ways. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Miller farm as Jacob stood at his kitchen window, watching his daughter Emma feed the chickens in the yard. Her small frame moved with practiced efficiency, scattering grain with one hand while clutching her faceless Amish doll, Martha, in the other. At 10 years old, she had taken on responsibilities that would have made his Sarah proud and broken her heart in equal measure. "The eggs are gathered," Emma called out in Pennsylvania Dutch, her voice carrying across the crisp October air. "Should I start breakfast?" Jacob's calloused hands tightened around his coffee mug. "No, Liebchen, I'll manage. You get ready for school." It had been 2 years since Sarah's passing, 2 years of empty chairs and silent suppers, 2 years of watching his daughter try to fill shoes too big for her tiny feet. The illness had taken Sarah quickly, too quickly for proper goodbyes, too quickly for him to learn all the things she did to keep their household running, like one of his well-oiled carpentry tools. As Emma disappeared into the house, Jacob's gaze drifted to the pile of bills on the kitchen table. The harvest had been poor this year. The drought in July, followed by too much rain in August, had cut their corn yield in half. His carpentry work, once a steady supplement to their farming income, had slowed as English customers tightened their purse strings in the uncertain economy. The most pressing concern was storage. Their current barn, built by his grandfather, groaned under the weight of equipment, feed, and his carpentry supplies. He needed space to expand his woodworking. Kitchen cabinets and furniture paid better than corn these days, but building a new structure was out of the question. The bills made that abundantly clear. "Jacob Miller, you stop that frowning before your face freezes that way." He turned to find his sister Ruth standing in the doorway, having let herself in as was her custom. At 38, Ruth was 4 years his junior, but had appointed herself his keeper since Sarah's death. Her husband, Thomas, stood behind her, hat in hand. "Ruth, Thomas, you're early. It's nearly 7. Ruth bustled past him to the stove. "And that child needs a proper breakfast before school. Honestly, Jacob, would it kill you to accept help? We're managing fine." Thomas cleared his throat. "Actually, Jacob, that's why we're here. There's something you should know about. Old Henry Zook mentioned it at the hardware store yesterday." Jacob raised an eyebrow. Henry Zook was the community's unofficial herald, a position he'd held for the better part of 40 years. "The county's auctioning off properties for back taxes," Thomas continued. "There's an old barn out on Musser Road, been abandoned for decades. They're asking 50 cents just to have someone take responsibility for it." 50 cents, Jacob set down his mug. "What's wrong with it?" "That's just it. Nobody knows. It belonged to an English family, the Washburns. They left in the 60s, and no one's claimed it since. County just wants it off their books." Ruth looked up from the eggs she was scrambling. "Thomas, that place gives everyone the shiver. You know what people say. What people say and what's true are often different things," Thomas interrupted gently. "It's a sound structure, from what I've seen from the road. Stone foundation, good bones, nothing a man with Jacob's skills couldn't handle." Emma appeared in the doorway, dressed for school in her dark dress and white cap. Are we getting a new barn deed? We're just talking, Emma. Come eat your breakfast. As his daughter settled at the table, Jacob's mind wandered to the possibilities. 50 cents. Even in their current situation, he could manage 50 cents. A second barn would mean room for a proper workshop, space to take on larger carpentry projects. Maybe even room to store lumber properly instead of tarping it behind the chicken coop. The auction's this afternoon, Thomas said quietly. 1 o'clock at the courthouse. I could drive you if you're interested. Jacob watched Emma carefully butter her toast, humming one of the hymns Sarah used to sing while cooking. His daughter deserved better than a father who could barely keep the farm afloat. She deserved security, opportunity, a future. I'll think about it, he said finally. Ruth shook her head, but said nothing more. She knew her brother well enough to recognize when his mind was working through a problem, turning it over like a piece of wood he was examining for grain and flaws. After Emma left for school, Jacob found himself walking through his overcrowded barn. Tools hung from every available surface. Lumber competed for space with sacks of feed. His latest project, a hope chest for the Yoder family, sat half-finished in the corner. Sawdust gathering on its surface, he ran his hand along the chest's smooth pine surface. Sarah had loved the smell of fresh-cut wood. She'd often bring him lunch while he worked, sitting on an upturned bucket to watch him plane and sand. "You shape wood, the way I shape bread," she'd say. With patience and love. The memory stung, but it also stirred something in him. Sarah wouldn't want him to give up. She'd been the practical one, the one who saw opportunities where others saw obstacles. By noon, Jacob had made his decision. He found Thomas in his own workshop, bent over a harness repair. That offer for a ride still stand. Thomas looked up, a knowing smile creasing his weathered face. "I'll get the buggy." The ride to the courthouse took them through the heart of Lancaster County. Fields of corn, stubble, and late vegetables stretched toward the horizon, punctuated by the occasional farmhouse and silo. They passed Amish buggies heading to market, children walking home from school for lunch. English tourists stopped along the road to take pictures. "Tell me what you know about this barn," Jacob said as they traveled. Thomas guided the horse around a slow-moving tract. "The Washburn place sits on about 2 acres, backed up against Culp's Woods. The family left sudden-like in 1963. Some say it was financial troubles, others," he paused, "others say they were spooked by something. But you know how stories grow in the telling. And the barn itself, stone foundation like I said, good-sized, maybe 40 by 60 feet. 2 levels, the kind they built to last a century ago. Windows are probably gone, roof might need work, but the bones are solid." They arrived at the courthouse to find a small gathering on the steps. The tax auction drew the usual crowd, bargain hunters, developers, and curious onlookers. Jacob recognized a few faces from the Amish community, though none acknowledged him directly. Attending such auctions was acceptable, but not exactly encouraged. The auctioneer, a portly man with a red face, worked through the list efficiently. Properties went for hundreds or thousands of dollars, houses in disrepair, commercial lots, a gas station that hadn't pumped fuel since the 80s. Finally, Lot 17, barn and 2 acres on Musser Road. Minimum bid 50 cents. "Do I hear 50 cents? Jacob raised his hand. The auctioneer looked surprised. 50 cents from the gentleman in the straw hat. "Do I hear 75? Silence. 50 cents going once, going twice, sold to bidder number 43. And just like that, Jacob Miller owned a barn. The paperwork took another hour. As Jacob signed his name and handed over 2 quarters, the clerk, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, leaned forward. "You know about that place, don't you? The stories? I know it's been empty a long time." She glanced around, then lowered her voice. "My mother remembered when the Washburns lived there, said they were nice folks, until they weren't. Started keeping to themselves, covering the windows, acting strange. Then one day gone, left everything behind. Everything, so the sheriff at the time said. Course, that was 60 years ago. I'm sure it's all rotted away by now. She stamped his deed. Still, you be careful out there, Mr. Miller. Some places are better left alone. Jacob took his paperwork and thanked her. Outside, Thomas was waiting with the buggy. Well? Thomas asked as they headed home. It's mine. Jacob patted the deed in his pocket. Want to take a look? Thomas glanced at the sun. We've got time before evening milking. They took the back roads to Musser Road, passing through stretches of farmland and forest. The road itself was barely more than a lane, gravel over dirt, rarely used except by locals taking shortcuts. There's, Thomas pointed. That's it. The barn stood back from the road, partially hidden by overgrown sumac and wild grapevines. Even from a distance, Jacob could see it was a substantial structure. The afternoon sun caught on what remained of the metal roof, sending glints through the surrounding trees. They pulled into what had once been a driveway, now just two ruts in the grass. Up close, the barn was both better and worse than Jacob had expected. The stone foundation appeared solid, the walls straight and true, but vines had claimed much of the exterior, and several boards hung loose like broken teeth. Want me to come in with you? Thomas asked. Jacob was already climbing down from the buggy. No need, I'll just take a quick look. He approached the barn slowly, noting details with his carpenter's eye. The main doors hung askew, but were salvageable, good hardwood beneath the weathering. The stone foundation showed no major cracks or settling. Even the roof, despite missing shingles, hadn't collapsed. The doors protested as he pulled them open, hinges screaming from decades of neglect. Inside, dust motes danced in shafts of light from holes in the roof. The air smelled of old hay, rust, and something else, something musty and animal-like. Jacob stepped inside, letting his eyes adjust to the dimness. The main floor was empty except for scattered debris and what looked like old farm equipment in the corners. A wooden ladder led to the loft, though he'd test its strength another day. He was examining the support beams, solid oak, still sound, when he heard it. Breathing, not the wind through gaps in the walls, not the settling of old wood. Breathing deep, rhythmic, deliberate. Jacob froze, listening. The sound came from deeper in the barn, from the shadows where the afternoon light didn't reach. It wasn't quite human, but it wasn't quite animal either. It was something in between, something that raised the hair on the back of his neck. Jacob, Thomas called from outside. Everything all right? Jacob backed toward the door, not taking his eyes off the darkness. The breathing continued, steady and somehow aware. Coming, he called back, his voice steadier than he felt. He stepped into the sunlight, pulling the doors closed behind him. Thomas was standing by the buggy, concern written on his face. Find anything interesting? Jacob glanced back at the barn. Through a gap in the walls, he could have sworn he saw movement, just a flicker there and gone. Maybe, he said quietly. Maybe I did. That evening, Jacob sat at his kitchen table, the deed to the barn spread before him like a map to an unknown country. Emma was upstairs finishing her homework, the scratch of her pencil on paper drifting down through the floorboards. Outside, the October wind rattled the windows, carrying with it the smell of wood smoke and dying leaves. He hadn't told anyone about the breathing. Not Thomas on the ride home, not Ruth when she'd stopped by to drop off a casserole. The sound echoed in his memory, deep, rhythmic, undeniably alive. His practical mind offered explanations. A trapped animal, wind through a unique gap in the walls. Even his own imagination, but his heart knew better. Something was living in that barn. Emma stood in the doorway, her nightgown making her look younger than her 10 years. Martha, her faceless doll, dangled from one hand. You should be in bed, Libchun. I heard you and Aunt Ruth talking about the new barn. She padded across the floor in bare feet. Are we really going to fix it up? Jacob pulled out a chair for her. That's the plan. We need the space for my workshop. Emma climbed into the chair, settling Martha in her lap. Ma'am would have liked that. She always said you needed a proper workshop. The casual mention of Sarah caught Jacob off guard, as it often did. Emma every spoke of her mother directly, though he often caught her humming Sarah's favorite hymns or arranging flowers the way Sarah had taught her. Yes, he managed. She did say that. Will it be scary? The barn, I mean. Timothy Lapp says his older brother went there once on a dare and saw ghosts. Jacob reached across the table to smooth a wayward strand of hair beneath her cap. Timothy Lapp's older brother also claims he saw a bear riding a bicycle last summer. What do you think? Emma giggled, a sound that had become too rare. That's silly. Exactly. Now off to bed. Tomorrow's a school day. She stood but hesitated. Dead. Can I come see the barn with you? I promise I'll be careful. The memory of that breathing sound made Jacob's response immediate. Not yet. Let me clear it out first. Make sure it's safe. Then you can help me plan the workshop. Deal. Deal. She hugged him goodnight. Martha pressed between them. I love you, Dad. I love you too, Emma. Sweet dreams. After she went upstairs, Jacob remained at the table, staring at the deed. 50 cents. He'd paid more for a box of nails last week. What kind of barn sold for 50 cents? And what kind of man bought it knowing something was wrong? The kind of man with a daughter to provide for, he told himself. The kind who couldn't afford to be afraid of shadows and strange noises. Sleep came fitfully that night. Jacob dreamed of the barn, but in his dreams it was new and filled with golden light. Sarah stood at his workbench, running her hands over smooth wood. You shape wood the way I shape bread, she said, but when she turned to face him, her eyes were dark and deep as the shadows in the barn's corners. He woke before dawn, as was his habit. The morning chores, milking, feeding, checking the animals, provided familiar rhythm, but his mind kept returning to Musser Road. By the time Emma left for school, Jacob had made his decision. He loaded his wagon with tools, a lantern, rope, a pitchfork, his hammer, and notably his hunting rifle. Going to the new barn, Ruth appeared at his elbow as he secured the tools. She had an uncanny ability to materialize whenever he was about to do something she considered foolish, just to assess what needs doing. Alone, it's broad daylight, Ruth. She crossed her arms. Sarah wouldn't want you taking unnecessary risks. Sarah would want me to provide for our daughter. The words came out harsher than intended. I'm sorry, I know. Ruth. Expression softened. Just be careful, and take this. She handed him a basket. Fresh bread and apple butter. In case you get hungry. The drive to Musser Road took longer with the wagon. Jacob used the time to plan. First, he'd need to clear out any debris, then assess the structure properly. Check for rot, damaged supports, anything that might make it unsafe. The breathing, well, he'd deal with that when he came to it. The barn looked different in the morning light. Less ominous, more sad, like an old man who'd outlived his friends. Jacob parked the wagon and stood for a moment, gathering his courage. Whatever was in there had had the night to leave. Perhaps it was already gone. The doors opened easier this time, though they still protest. Sunlight streamed through the gaps in the walls and roof, illuminating dust motes and revealing details he'd missed yesterday. Old horse stalls lined one wall. A workbench, similar to his own but older, stood in a corner. Tools hung from pegs, rusted but salvageable. And then he heard it again, the breathing. It came from the far corner, behind what looked like a stack of old lumber. Deeper now, with a wheeze that spoke of illness or injury. Jacob's hand went to the rifle slung over his shoulder, but he didn't unsling it. Instead, he picked up the lantern, lit it despite the daylight, and moved forward. Hello? His voice echoed in the space. Is someone there? The breathing hitched, then resumed. Closer now, Jacob could hear something else. A rustling, like something large, shifting position. He rounded the lumber pile and stopped dead. It wasn't human, but it wasn't quite animal either. The creature lay on a bed of old hay and torn fabric. It was massive, easily the size of a small horse, covered in what might have been fur, or might have been something else entirely. The fur, if that's what it was dark brown, matted in places, with an odd iridescent quality where the light hit it, but it was the face that made Jacob's breath catch. The features were almost human, eyes too intelligent, nose too refined, mouth too expressive, but elongated, stretched, as if someone had tried to sculpt a human face onto an animal skull. Those eyes, golden brown and filled with pain, fixed on Jacob with unmistakable intelligence. The creature tried to move, and Jacob saw the problem. Its left side was a mess of old wounds, infected and seeping. How long had it been here, suffering in the dark? Jacob's fear transformed into something else, the same feeling he got when he found an injured animal in his fields. He set down the lantern slowly, making no sudden movements. "Easy," he said, using the same tone he used with spooked horses. "Easy now, I'm not going to hurt you." The creature watched him, breathing labored. Up close, Jacob could see more details. Hands that were almost human but ended in curved claws. Feet that might have been paws or might have been something else. And around its neck, nearly hidden in the matted fur, something that made his heart skip, a collar. Old leather, with a tarnished nameplate. Moving slowly, Jacob reached for his water flask. The creature tensed, but didn't flee. Couldn't flee, he realized. It was too weak. Thirsty, he poured water into his cupped palm, extending it carefully. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, with painful effort, the creature leaned forward. A tongue too long, too rough, lapped at the water. Its eyes never left Jacob's face. He gave it more water, then opened Ruth's basket. The smell of fresh bread filled the air. The creature's nostrils flared. "Hungry too, I bet." Jacob tore off a piece of bread, offering it on his flat palm like he would to a horse. The creature took it delicately, careful of its teeth, teeth that Jacob tried not to look at too closely. As it ate, he studied the collar again. The nameplate was turned away, but he could make out the edge of engraving. "Been here a long time, haven't you?" Jacob kept his voice soft. "Since the Washburns left, maybe." At the name Washburn, the creature made a sound part whine, part moan, entirely heartbreaking, its eyes filled with what could only be described as grief. Jacob sat back on his heels, mind racing. The Washburns had left in 1960. The practical part of him, the part that fixed problems with wood and nails, took over. Whatever this creature was, wherever it had come from, it was suffering, and Jacob Miller had never been able to turn away from suffering. "All right," he said, decision made. "Let's see about those wounds." He fetched supplies from his wagon, clean cloth, the bottle of iodine he kept for emergencies, more water. The creature watched him return with something like hope in its strange eyes. "This is going to hurt," Jacob warned, "but it'll help. I promise." As gently as possible, he began cleaning the wounds. The creature whimpered, but didn't pull away. The damage was extensive, but old, infected scratches, and what looked like bite marks. Had it been attacked, or had it done this to itself in desperation? As he worked, Jacob found himself talking about the farm, about Emma, about the workshop he planned to build. The creature listened, occasionally making soft sounds that seemed almost like responses. "My daughter would like you," he said, surprising himself. "She's got a soft heart for strays, takes after her mother that way." The sun had climbed high by the time he finished. The wounds were clean, treated with iodine, and wrapped as best he could manage. The creature looked better already, eyes brighter, breathing easier. "I have to go," Jacob said, reluctantly, "but I'll come back tomorrow with more food and proper bandages, maybe some blankets too. All right?" The creature made a sound that might have been agreement. As Jacob gathered his supplies, it shifted, and the nameplate on the collar caught the light. He leaned closer, squinting at the engraved letters. Gabriel, the creature, Gabriel, met his eyes. In that gaze, Jacob saw intelligence, sadness, and something else. Gratitude, perhaps. Or recognition. All the way home, Jacob's mind churned. What had he stumbled into? What was Gabriel? The rational part of him insisted he should report this, tell someone, get help. But something held him back. The Washburns had left 60 years ago. If Gabriel had been here all that time, waiting, surviving, alone. That evening, as he helped Emma with her arithmetic homework, Jacob found himself studying his daughter's face. The trust in her eyes, the easy way she leaned against him as she worked through problems. What would he do to protect her? What would he become if he lost her? Dad, you're not paying attention, Emma complained. Sorry, Liebchen. Where were we? The word problem about the farmer and his apples. Jacob focused on the page, but his mind kept drifting to the barn. Tomorrow he'd bring more supplies, maybe some old horse blankets from the loft, definitely more food. And he'd try to find out more about the Washburns, what had really happened all those years ago. Dad? Yes. You look worried. Is it about the new barn? Jacob pulled her close. No, Emma. Just thinking about all the work to be done. Now, let's figure out how many baskets that farmer needs. But even as they worked through multiplication tables, Jacob couldn't shake the image of those golden brown eyes, so human and yet so other. Gabriel, what are you? And what happened to you? Outside, the October wind picked up, rattling the windows like something trying to get in. Or, Jacob thought with a shiver, like something trying to get out. The next morning brought rain, a steady drizzle that turned the farmyard to mud and made the chickens huddle miserably in their coop. Jacob moved through his chores mechanically, his mind already at the barn on Musser Road. He'd barely slept, haunted by questions. What was Gabriel? How had he survived 60 years? And most pressingly, was Jacob putting his family at risk by helping him? You're going back there today. It wasn't a question. Ruth stood in the barn doorway, watching him milk the cows. The roof needs immediate attention if I'm going to use the space. Rain's getting in. That's not what I mean, and you know it. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Thomas told me you were spooked yesterday. Said you looked like you'd seen a ghost when you came out. Jacob kept his hands steady on the milking, the rhythmic sound filling the silence. Thomas worries too much, and you don't worry enough. Jacob, that place is mine now, bought and paid for. He moved to the next cow. I can't afford to be superstitious, Ruth. You know that. She was quiet for a moment. Then take someone with you, please. If not Thomas, then one of the other men. I'll be fine. That's what Samuel Yoder said before his accident. Pride goeth before a fall, brother. Jacob looked up at her then, seeing the genuine fear in her eyes. His little sister, who'd helped raise Emma these past 2 years, who'd held their family together when he couldn't. I'll be careful, he promised. And if there's any real danger, I'll get help. Fair. She nodded reluctantly. Emma's spending the day with me. I'm teaching her and the other girls how to can apple butter. She'll like that. Jacob stood, lifting the full milk pail. Thank you, Ruth, for everything. Just come home safe. That child's lost enough. An hour later, Jacob loaded his wagon with supplies, old horse blankets from the loft, a tarp that might serve as better bedding, more food including some dried meat from their smokehouse, and medical supplies he'd bought from the English pharmacy in town. He'd told the pharmacist they were for a horse, which wasn't entirely a lie. The rain had softened to a mist by the time he reached Musser Road. The barn looked even more forlorn in the grey light, water dripping from holes in the roof to form puddles on the ground. Jacob pulled the wagon as close to the doors as possible and began unloading. Gabriel? He called as he entered. It's Jacob, from yesterday. A shuffling sound from the far corner, then that distinctive breathing. Jacob lit the lantern despite the daylight. The rain made the barn's interior even darker than before. Gabriel was where he'd left him, but sitting up now, leaning against the wall. In the lamplight, Jacob could see more details he'd miss. The creature's hands, while clawed, showed clear signs of dexterity. Opposable thumbs, flexible fingers, His face, that disturbing blend of human and other, held expressions that were unmistakably intelligent. "Brought you some things." Jacob set down his supplies, moving slowly. "Blankets, food, better medicine for those wounds." Gabriel watched every movement with those golden brown eyes. When Jacob spread out the blankets, creating a more comfortable bed, the creature made a sound that might have been gratitude. "Let me check your bandages." Jacob approached carefully. "Need to make sure infection isn't setting in." As he worked, unwrapping the makeshift bandages from yesterday, Gabriel remained perfectly still. The wounds looked better, less angry, beginning to scab. Whatever Gabriel was, he healed faster than a normal animal. Or human. "Good," Jacob murmured. "Very good. This might sting a bit." He applied fresh antiseptic, rewrapped the wounds with proper bandages. Gabriel winced, but didn't pull away. When Jacob offered water, he drank deeply. When offered food, he ate with careful, almost delicate movements. It was while Jacob was packing away the medical supplies that Gabriel moved. Slowly, painfully, he reached for something in the hay near his makeshift bed. His movements were deliberate, purposeful. He pulled out what looked like a bundle of cloth and held it toward Jacob. "What's this?" Jacob took the bundle carefully. It was heavier than expected, wrapped in what might have once been a child's blanket. As he unwrapped it, his breath caught. Inside was a collection of objects: a tarnished silver locket, a small leather-bound journal, a handful of black and white photographs, and strangest of all, what looked like a collar, smaller than the one Gabriel wore, made for something the size of a large dog. The photographs were water-damaged, but visible. A family: man, woman, 2 children. The Washburns, Jacob assumed. But in several photos, there were 2 large dogs. No, not dogs. The shapes were wrong, the proportions off. They looked like... Jacob looked at Gabriel, then back at the photos. One showed a boy, maybe 12 years old, arms wrapped around one of the creatures. Both were smiling, or at least the creature's expression seemed like a smile. With trembling hands, Jacob opened the journal. The pages were yellowed, some stuck together, but the writing was still legible. The first entry was dated June 15, 1961. "Papa brought them home today. Says he found them in the woods, injured and scared. Mama was frightened at first, but when she saw how gentle they were, how they looked at us with such intelligent eyes, she couldn't turn them away. We're calling them Gabriel and Mariel. They're not like anything I've ever seen, but somehow I'm not afraid. It's like they belong with us." Jacob flipped through more pages, reading fragments. Gabriel learned 3 new words today. He can't speak them, but he understands. When I say friend, he puts his poor hand on his chest. Mariel is going to have babies. Papa's worried what people will think if they find out. We've stopped having visitors. The men came again today. They say we're harboring genders. Papa told them to leave, but they'll be back. Gabriel was so scared he hid in the barn all day. The entries became more frantic toward the end. They hurt Mariel. She tried to protect her babies, but there were too many of them. Gabriel fought them off, but he was hurt too. We've hidden him in the barn. Papa says we have to leave, have to get away before they come back. The last entry was barely legible, water-damaged and hastily written. We're leaving tonight. I wanted to take Gabriel, but Papa says it's too dangerous. He says Gabriel will be safer here, that they won't look for him if we're gone. I left him all the food I could find. I taught him how to work the pump for water. He understands he has to hide. He understands we'll come back for him. I promise we'll come back." The journal ended there. Jacob sat back, the weight of understanding settling on his shoulders. 60 years. Gabriel had waited 60 years for a 12-year-old boy's promise to be kept. He looked at the creature, at Gabriel, who was watching him with those impossibly expressive eyes. Slowly Gabriel reached out and touched the journal, then the smaller collar, and made that heartbreaking sound again. Loss. Grief. A loneliness so profound it transcended species. "Mariel," Jacob said softly. She was your mate. Gabriel's eyes closed, and he nodded a distinctly human gesture that no animal should be able to make. And the babies? Another sound, softer this time. Gabriel touched the smaller collar again, then gestured toward the door, toward the outside world. Gone. All gone. Jacob felt tears prick his eyes. A family torn apart by fear and ignorance. A creature, no, a being left to wait in the dark for 6 decades, faithful to a child's promise. How had he survived? What had he eaten? How had he not gone mad from loneliness? "I'm sorry," Jacob said, and meant it. "I'm so sorry for what happened to you." Gabriel tilted his head, studying Jacob's face. Then, with obvious effort, he moved his hand paw in a specific gesture. It took Jacob a moment to recognize it. The sign for friend that the journal had mentioned, hand to chest. Without thinking, Jacob mimicked the gesture. "Friend," he said. Something changed in Gabriel's expression. Hope, perhaps. Or recognition that after 60 years, he was no longer alone. They sat in companionable silence for a while, rain pattering on the damaged roof. Jacob found himself thinking about Emma, about what he would do to protect her. The Washburns had faced an impossible choice: save their children by abandoning Gabriel, or risk everything by staying. He couldn't fault them for choosing their children, even as his heart broke for the creature they'd left behind. "Gabriel," he said finally, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Can you understand me? Really understand?" Gabriel nodded slowly. "Are there others like you, others who might come looking?" A shake of the head. Emphatic. "Are you dangerous? To humans, I mean. To my daughter." Gabriel's eyes widened. He shook his head violently, then made a gesture Jacob recognized, cradling like holding a baby. Then he pointed to the photographs of the Washburn children, touched his chest, and made the cradling motion again. "You protected them, the children." A nod. Jacob made his decision. "All right, here's what we're going to do. You're going to stay here for now. It's safer than trying to move you. I'm going to keep bringing food, water, medicine, get you healthy again. Then we'll figure out something more permanent. But Gabriel," he waited until those golden eyes met his, "you have to stay hidden. There are still people who wouldn't understand, who might hurt you. Can you do that?" Gabriel nodded, then surprised Jacob by taking his hand gently, so gently, and squeezing it. A thank you that needed no word. Jacob stayed another hour, making Gabriel more comfortable, ensuring he had enough food and water for several days. He showed Gabriel where he'd hide extra supplies in case Jacob couldn't come for some reason. All the while, his mind worked on the problem. He couldn't keep this secret forever. But for now, until Gabriel was stronger, until he could figure out a better solution, this would have to do. As he prepared to leave, Gabriel made a sound, pointing to the journal. "You want me to take it?" A nod. Then Gabriel pointed to himself, to Jacob, and made a rolling motion with his hands. "Continue the story, perhaps, or learn more." Jacob tucked the journal inside his coat. "I'll read it. All of it. I promise." The ride home seemed longer, the weight of secrets heavier than any load of lumber. As his farm came into view, Jacob saw Emma in the yard with Ruth, both covered in flour from their day of baking. His daughter's laughter carried on the wind, bright and innocent. How could he explain Gabriel to her? How could he protect them both? His daughter, from a fear she shouldn't have to carry, and Gabriel from a world that had already shown its cruelty. That night, after Emma was asleep, Jacob sat by lamplight and read the journal cover to cover. The story that emerged was one of love and fear, kindness and prejudice. The Washburn boy Michael had loved Gabriel and Marielle like family. His entries spoke of teaching them games, sharing meals, lying in the hayloft looking at stars, while Gabriel made soft rumbling sounds that might have been his version of humming. But the outside world had intruded. Whispers became shouts, concern became violent, and a family was torn apart by the weight of being different. The last pages contained drawings, childish but clear, Gabriel and Marielle playing with the children. The whole family gathered for a meal, and on the very last page, a promise written in a 12-year-old's careful script, I'll come back for you. Wait for me. Be safe. Be patient. I'll come back. Michael Washburn never came back. Whatever had driven them away had kept them away. And Gabriel had waited, faithful as a dog, patient as a 8, alone in the dark. Jacob closed the journal and wiped his eyes. Tomorrow he'd bring more supplies. Maybe some books could Gabriel raid. The intelligence in those eyes suggested maybe he'd bring warmer blankets too, with winter coming. And somehow he'd find a way to give Gabriel what he needed most. Not just food or shelter, but friendship, family, the promise of not being alone anymore. Outside, the rain had stopped. Stars peeked through breaking clouds, and somewhere on Musser Road, in a barn that had held secrets for 60 years, a creature that was more than animal but not quite human curled up in fresh blankets, belly full for the first time in memory, wounds tended by gentle hands. For the first time in 60 years, Gabriel slept without fear. 2 weeks passed in a rhythm of secrets. Each morning Jacob would complete his farm chores, see Emma off to school, then make his way to Musser Road. What had started as medical care had evolved into something more, a friendship that transcended the boundaries of species. Gabriel was healing remarkably fast. The infected wounds had closed, leaving pink scars beneath his strange fur. He'd gained weight on the steady diet Jacob provided, and his eyes had lost that haunted, desperate quality. But more than physical healing, something else was happening. They were learning to communicate. It started with simple gestures. Gabriel would point to objects, and Jacob would name them: bucket, rope, lantern. Gabriel couldn't speak. His throat wasn't built for human words, but he could understand, and he had his own ways of responding. On this particular morning, Jacob found Gabriel sitting up, arranging small objects in patterns on the barn floor. Stones, skeks, scraps of metal, all carefully placed. "What's this?" Jacob asked, setting down his supplies. Gabriel pointed to one pattern, 3 stones in a line, then to Jacob, then to another pattern, 1 large stone with 2 smaller ones, and to himself and the empty space beside him. Finally, to a single stone set apart, and he made that low, mournful sound. "Families," Jacob breathed. "You're showing me families. Mine, yours, and you alone." Gabriel nodded, then rearranged the stones, bringing the single one closer to the 3. He looked at Jacob hopefully. "You want to be part of a family again?" The nod was emphatic. Gabriel then did something new. He picked up a stick, and with surprising dexterity, scratched marks in the dirt, rough, uncertain, but recognizable. Letters. F-R-E-N-D, friend, Jacob read. "Yes, Gabriel, we're friends." Gabriel shook his head, pointed to the letters again, then to Jacob, then made a questioning gesture. "Am I your friend?" When Gabriel nodded, Jacob continued, Yes, I'm your friend." Gabriel made that rumbling sound Jacob had come to recognize as happiness. Then he scratched more letters. E-M-A. He stopped, looking uncertain. "Emma, you're asking about Emma." Jacob's chest tightened. "She's my daughter. She's 10 years old. He paused, choosing his words carefully. "She doesn't know about you." Gabriel tilted his head, questioning. "It's complicated. People might not understand. They might be afraid, like before." Jacob gestured to the journal he'd been bringing back and forth, reading aloud from it sometimes. "I want to tell her, but I need to be sure it's safe, for both of you." Gabriel considered this, then scratched. "S-A-F. Safe," Jacob finished. "Yes, I want everyone to be safe." They were interrupted by the sound of a buggy on the road. Jacob froze, and Gabriel immediately retreated to the shadows, his movements silent despite his size. The ability to hide was probably what had kept him alive all these years. "Jacob, you in there?" Thomas's voice called out. Jacob stepped outside, closing the barn door behind him. "Thomas, what brings you out here?" "Ruth sent me. Says you've been spending every morning here for 2 weeks. The community's starting to notice." Thomas looked past Jacob at the barn. "Making progress. Some. It's a bigger job than I thought. Need help? I could spare a few hours." "Not yet. I'm still assessing what needs to be done." Jacob forced himself to relax, to lean casually, against the door, mostly clearing out old debris right now. Boring work. Thomas studied him with the keen eye of someone who'd known him for decades. You sure everything's all right? You seem different lately. Distracted during church, leaving community gatherings early. Just tired, trying to balance the farm and this project. Thomas didn't look convinced. Well, if you need help, you know where to find me. And Jacob, whatever you're really doing here, be careful. Some secrets are heavier than others. After Thomas left, Jacob found Gabriel pressed against the far wall, trembling. The fear of discovery was bone deep, trained into him by violence and loss. It's okay, Jacob soothed. He's gone. You're safe. Gabriel slowly relaxed, but the incident had shaken them both. How long could this continue? How long before someone discovered their secret? That afternoon, back at his farm, Jacob was working on the Yoda hope chest when Emma appeared in the workshop doorway. School had let out early for teacher preparation day. Dade, can I help? Of course, you can sand this panel. Remember, with the grain, not against it. They worked in companionable silence for a while, the rhythmic sound of sanding filling the space. Emma had her mother's patience for detailed work.
Dade, are you worried about something? Jacob's hand stilled on the plane. Why do you ask? You've been different, quieter, and you go to the new barn every day but never take me like you promised. The weight of his secret pressed down. Emma deserved better than lies, but how could he explain Gabriel? The barn is complicated, he said finally. There are things there I'm still figuring out. Dangerous things? No, not dangerous, just different. He set down the plane, choosing his words carefully. Emma, if you met someone who was very different from us, different in a way that might frighten some people, what would you do? Emma considered this with the seriousness she brought to all important questions. Mom used to say that God loves all his creatures, even the ones we don't understand. She said fear makes people cruel sometimes. Your mother was very wise. Is there someone different in the barn, Dad? Jacob's heart raced. His daughter had always been too perceptive for her own good. What makes you think that? You take food, more than just for lunch, and blankets, and you brought medicine from town. She looked up at him with Sarah's eyes. Is someone hurt? The moment stretched between them. Jacob thought Gabriel alone for 60 years, thought of the Washburn children who'd loved him, thought of his promise to Sarah to raise Emma with courage and kindness. Yes, he said quietly. Someone is hurt, someone who needs help but has to stay hidden because not everyone would understand. Emma set down her sandpaper, like when we hid the freed family's escaped slave in our barn. Great-great-grandfather's story. Something like that, yes. Can I meet them? Not yet. When it's safe. When I'm sure, he trailed off. When you're sure they won't hurt me? No, Liebsch. When I'm sure, you won't be hurt by knowing. There's a difference. Emma hugged him suddenly, fierce and tight. I trust you, Dade. And whoever needs help, I'm glad you're helping them. Mam would be glad too. That evening, after Emma was in bed, Jacob sat with the Washburn Journal and his Bible, seeking guidance. The journal spoke of love transcending differences. The Bible spoke of showing kindness to strangers, and the least of these. But it also spoke of protecting one's children, of the weight of choices. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Ruth entered without waiting for permission, as was her way. Emma told me about your conversation. Jacob tensed. Did she? She's worried about you, says you're keeping secrets, but that it's to help someone. Ruth sat across from him. Jacob, what's going on? Really? He looked at his sister, weighing options. Ruth had helped raise him after their parents died. She'd stood by him through Sarah's illness and death. If he couldn't trust her, if I tell you something, you have to promise to keep an open mind and heart. You're scaring me. Promise me, Ruth. I promise. Jacob took a breath. There's someone living in the barn. Someone who's been there a very long time, hurt and alone. I've been helping him. A vagrant, Jacob,
That could be dangerous. Not a vagrant. And not exactly human. Ruth went very still. What do you mean, not exactly human? So Jacob told her. About Gabriel, about the journal, about 60 years of waiting. He showed her the photographs, the entries about love and fear and loss. He told her about Gabriel's intelligence, his gentleness, his grief for his lost family. When he finished, Ruth was pale. Jacob, this is impossible. I thought so too, but he's real, Ruth, real and suffering and alone. And you've been, what, nursing it back to health? Him, not it, him. His name is Gabriel. Ruth stood abruptly, pacing. This is madness. You don't know what this creature is, where it came from. It could be dangerous, could be what? A demon, a monster. Jacob's voice hardened. That's what they said 60 years ago. That's why a family was torn apart. Why Mariel died. Why Gabriel has been alone in the dark for 6 decades. You don't know, I know enough. I know he's gentle. I know he protected the Washburn children. I know he understands friendship and loss and hope. What else matters? Ruth stopped pacing, tears in her eyes. What matters is your daughter. What matters is your safety. Jacob, please, end this before someone gets hurt. Someone is already hurt. Someone has been hurt and alone for 60 years. Would you have me turn my back on that? To protect Emma? Yes. They stared at each other across a chasm of understanding. Finally, Ruth wiped her eyes. I won't tell anyone. For Emma's sake. For yours. I'll keep your secret. But Jacob, be careful. Be so very careful. The world hasn't grown kinder to those who are different. After she left, Jacob sat in the darkness, wrestling with doubt. Was he putting his daughter at risk? Was his compassion clouding his judgment? But then he remembered Gabriel's eyes when he'd scratched Emma's name in the dirt. The hope there. The longing for connection, for family, for something beyond mere survival. Tomorrow, he decided, tomorrow he would take the next step because some risks were worth taking, and some secrets were too heavy to carry alone. In her bedroom, Emma lay awake, listening to the murmur of adult voices below. She clutched Martha, her faceless doll, and whispered prayers into the darkness. For her father, who carried burdens he wouldn't share. For whoever was hurt and hiding in the barn. For courage to face whatever came next. And miles away in a barn that had been a prison for 60 years, Gabriel curled up in his nest of blankets and practiced writing letters in the dirt. EMMA, JACOB, FAMILY, HOPE, the words of a new life slowly taking shape in the darkness. The morning dawned cold and clear, the first real taste of winter in the air. Frost silvered the grass, and Jacob's breath misted as he did the morning milking. It had been 3 days since his conversation with Ruth, 3 days of careful normalcy while he wrestled with his decision. Today, it had to be today. Emma was unusually quiet at breakfast, pushing her eggs around her plate. She'd been subdued since their conversation in the workshop, watching him with those 2 knowing eyes. "Dade," she said suddenly, "I've been thinking about what you said, about someone being hurt." Jacob set down his coffee. "Oh? In school we learned about the Good Samaritan, how he helped someone different from him, someone others walked past." She looked up at him. "Is that what you're doing? Something like that? Then I want to help too." The words hung between them. Jacob had known this moment would come, had rehearsed what he would say. But faced with his daughter's earnest determination, all his prepared speeches crumbled. "It's not that simple, Emma. Because I'm young? Because once you know something, you can't unknow it. And this might change how you see the world." Emma stood, carrying her plate to the sink with careful dignity. "Maybe the world needs changing." "Lord," she sounded like her mother. "All right," Jacob heard himself say. "After school. But Emma, you have to promise me something. No matter what you see, no matter how strange or frightening it might seem at first, you'll give me a chance to explain. You'll keep an open heart. I promise. The school day seemed to crawl. Jacob tried to focus on his work, finishing the Yoda rope chest, repairing a broken plow, but his mind kept returning to what was coming. He'd spent the morning with Gabriel, preparing him, trying to explain that a child would be coming. Gabriel had been excited but also terrified, pacing the barn with nervous energy. When the school bell finally rang, Jacob was waiting with the buggy. Emma climbed in, her face serious. "Aunt Ruth knows," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, she's scared." "Yes, are you?" Jacob guided the horse onto the main road. "A little, but not of what you think. I'm scared of making the wrong choice, of not protecting the right things." They rode in silence until the turn onto Musser Road. Then Emma asked, "What's their name?" "Gabriel. Like the angel?" "I suppose so. Yes." The barn came into view, looking less ominous in the afternoon sunlight. Jacob had repaired some of the roof, cleared the worst of the overgrowth. It almost looked respectable. "Stay close to me," he said as they climbed down. "Move slowly, speak softly. Gabriel has been alone a very long time and he's shy." Emma took his hand, her small fingers gripping tight. Together, they approached the barn. "Gabriel?" Jacob called as they entered. "It's Jacob. I've brought someone special to meet you." No response. The barn seemed empty, but Jacob knew better. Gabriel was there, hidden in the shadows, watching. "It's all right," Jacob continued. "This is Emma, my daughter, the one I've told you about." A slight rustling from the far corner. Emma's hand tightened in his, but she didn't pull back. "Hello, Gabriel," she said, her voice clear and steady. "My dad says you're hurt. I'm sorry you're hurt." More rustling. Then slowly a shape emerged from the shadows. Gabriel moved carefully, staying low, non-threatening. In the filtered sunlight, his strangeness was fully apparent. The impossible blend of human and animal features, the intelligent eyes in an inhuman face. Emma gasped softly, but didn't flee. She stood perfectly still, watching as Gabriel approached. He stopped about 10 feet away, crouching to make himself smaller, less intimidating. For a long moment, child and creature regarded each other. Then Emma did something that took Jacob's breath away. She let go of his hand and sat down on the barn floor, making herself smaller too. "I'm Emma," she said simply. "I'm 10. I like reading and helping Dad in the workshop." "What do you like?" Gabriel tilted his head, those expressive eyes studying her. Then, carefully, he scratched letters in the dirt. "Stars. You like stars." Emma's face lit up. "Me too. Dad taught me the constellations. Do you know them?" Gabriel nodded, then added, "Longtime. You've been here a long time?" When he nodded again, Emma's expression grew solemn. "That must have been very lonely." Gabriel made a sound, half whimper, half sigh. His eyes glistened with what could only be tears. "Well," Emma said firmly, "you're not alone anymore. We're friends now. That's what Dad taught me. Once you're friends with someone, they're never really alone." And just like that, the bridge was built. Emma chattered about school, about her favorite books, about the chickens that always pecked her when she gathered eggs. Gabriel listened with rapt attention, occasionally scratching responses in the dirt. When she showed him Martha, her faceless doll, he examined it carefully before handing it back with gentle reverence. Jacob watched in wonder. Where adults saw strangeness and danger, his daughter saw only someone who needed kindness. The pure simplicity of it humbled him. As the afternoon wore on, Emma grew bolder. She showed Gabriel how to play cat's cradle with a piece of string. He couldn't manage it with his different hands, but he made a game of tangling it in increasingly creative ways that made her giggle. The sound of his daughter's laughter filling the barn, that had held only silence for 60 years, made Jacob's eyes burn with unshed tears. Gabriel, Emma said eventually, can I ask you something? He nodded. Are there others like you? Family? The light dimmed in Gabriel's eyes. He shook his head slowly, then scratched. Gone. I'm sorry, Emma said softly. I lost someone too. My mam. It hurts, doesn't it? Gabriel nodded, and Emma did something that stopped Jacob's heart. She scooted forward and took one of Gabriel's strange hands in both of hers. He could have hurt her. Those claws could have torn through her small fingers like paper. Instead, he held perfectly still, looking at their joined hands with wonder. But you know what? Emma continued. Dad's says love doesn't go away. It just changes shape, like how water becomes ice or steam. But it's still water. The love is still there, just different. Gabriel made that rumbling sound, the one Jacob had learned meant contentment or agreement. With his free hand, he scratched. Y-I-S-E. Mam was wise. I try to remember what she taught me. Emma looked at her father. Died, can Gabriel come live with us? The question Jacob had been dreading. It's not that simple, Liebchen. Not everyone would understand about Gabriel. They might be afraid, like the people who hurt his family. Jacob's throat tightened. Yes. Emma turned back to Gabriel. Then we'll keep you safe here, and we'll visit every day, and maybe someday, when people are ready, you can come home with us. Would that be okay? Gabriel looked between father and daughter, these unexpected saviors, who offered not just food and shelter, but something far more precious, acceptance, family. He nodded slowly, then scratched one more word, H-O-P-E. They stayed until the sun began to sink low. Emma helped Jacob refresh Gabriel's water and food, chattering all the while about things she could bring next time, books maybe, or paper for drawing since writing in dirt was limiting. Gabriel watched her with soft eyes, occasionally making sounds that might have been laughter. As they prepared to leave, Emma hugged Gabriel. He froze for a moment, then carefully, so carefully, returned the embrace. His arms could have crushed her, but he held her like spun glass, precious and fragile. We'll come back tomorrow, she promised, and the day after, and the day after that. You'll see. On the ride home, Emma was quiet for a long time. Then, Dad, why did those people hurt Gabriel's family? Because they were afraid of what they didn't understand. That's stupid. Yes, Jacob agreed. It is. We can't let that happen again. No, we can't. Emma leaned against him. Martha clutched in her arms. He's not scary at all. He's just sad and lonely, like how I felt after Mam died. And now I have you, and Aunt Ruth, and friends, and Gabriel has us. She yawned. It's not the same as having Mam back, but it helps. That evening, Ruth was waiting for them, dinner warm on the stove. She took one look at their faces, and her shoulders slumped. She met him. She did. Ruth looked at Emma, searching for signs of trauma or fear. Finding none, she sighed. And he's wonderful, Emma said firmly. He's gentle and smart and sad, and he likes stars, and he's been alone for 60 years, and we're going to be his family now. Ruth opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Finally, Lord help us all. But she served dinner without further comment, and when Emma excitedly told her about teaching Gabriel cat's cradle, Ruth listened. And if her expression softened despite herself, well, only Jacob noticed. That night, as Jacob tucked Emma into bed, she asked, "Do you think Gabriel dreams?" "I don't know. Maybe. I hope he does. I hope he dreams about his family, the happy times, and I hope starting tonight, he dreams about us too." Jacob kissed her forehead. "Sleep well, Liebchen." But long after Emma had drifted off, Jacob stood at his bedroom window, looking toward Musser Road. In his mind, he saw Gabriel curled in his nest of blankets, less alone than he'd been in 60 years. He thought about the courage of children, the weight of secrets, the way love could bridge the most unlikely chasms. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Word would spread, as word always did. Questions would be asked. Decisions would have to be made about Gabriel's future. But tonight, a creature that shouldn't exist slept peacefully in a barn, dreaming perhaps of a little girl's laughter and the warmth of acceptance. And in a farmhouse 3 miles away, a father and daughter slept with the peace that comes from doing what's right, even when it's not easy, especially when it's not easy. Winter arrived early that year, blanketing Lancaster County in pristine white. The snow muffled sounds and softened edges, making the world feel smaller, more intimate. For 3 weeks after Emma's first meeting with Gabriel, they had fallen into a routine that felt both magical and precarious. Every afternoon, Jacob and Emma would bundle into the buggy and make their way to Musser Road. Emma had started teaching Gabriel to read, really read, not just recognize letters. She'd brought her old primers, and the sight of the massive creature hunched over a children's book, Emma patiently guiding his claw-tipped finger along the words, would have been comical if it weren't so touching. The cat sat on the mat. Gabriel would mouth silently, unable to voice the words but clearly understanding them. Emma would clap with delight at his progress, and that rumbling sound of contentment would fill the barn. But secrets, Jacob was learning, were like water. They found ways to seep through the smallest cracks. It started with questions. Where did Jacob and Emma disappear to every afternoon? Why were they buying so much extra food? Why did Emma, usually so open, become evasive when asked about her daily activities? The tipping point came on a Thursday afternoon in early December. Jacob and Emma arrived at the barn to find the doors standing open, snow drifting inside. Jacob's blood turned to ice. "Stay in the buggy," he ordered Emma, but she was already scrambling down. "Gabriel," she called, running into the barn. "Gabriel, where are you?" They found him huddled in the farthest corner, trembling. Fresh tracks in the snow told the story. Someone had been here. Multiple someones. From the look of Gabriel was unharmed but terrified, pressed so far into the corner it seemed he was trying to disappear into the wall itself. "It's okay," Emma soothed, approaching slowly. "We're here. You're safe." But Gabriel shook his head violently, pointing to the door, then to them, making shooing gestures. "Go. Leave. Danger." That's when Jacob saw it, spray-painted on the barn wall in violent red letters. "We know what you're hiding. Leave or burn." Emma gasped. Who would do this? Jacob's mind raced. Who had found out? How? And more importantly, what would they do next? "We need to get Gabriel out of here," he said. "Tonight." But Deward, where can he go? That was the question, wasn't it? Where could a creature like Gabriel hide in a world that had no place for him? They spent the rest of the afternoon trying to calm Gabriel, assuring him they wouldn't abandon him. But the damage was done. The safe haven they'd created had been violated. Gabriel wouldn't eat, wouldn't engage with Emma's books. He just sat, watching the door, waiting for violence to return. On the ride home, Emma was fighting tears. "Why are people so mean? Fear makes people do terrible things," Jacob said, though his own anger burned hot. "But we're not going to let them hurt Gabriel. I promise." That evening, after Emma was in bed, Jacob sat at his kitchen table, wrestling with impossible choices. He couldn't move Gabriel to his farm. Too many people came and went. He couldn't leave him in the barn, not now that he'd been discovered. A knock at the door interrupted his spiraling thoughts. He opened it to find not Ruth or Thomas, but Bishop Lapp, flanked by 2 other church elders. "Bishop," Jacob said, his heart sinking. "Please come in." They filed in silently, faces grey. The bishop, an elderly man with kind eyes that now looked troubled, got straight to the point. "Jacob Miller, we've received disturbing reports. They say you've been harboring something unnatural in the old Washburn barn, that you've exposed your daughter to it." "His name is Gabriel," Jacob said quietly, "and he's not an it." The elders exchanged glances. One of them, Samuel Zook, leaned forward. So it's true? The stories about the Washburn creatures? I don't know about stories. I know about Gabriel. He's been alone for 60 years, waiting for a family that never came back. He's gentle, intelligent, and he's never hurt anyone. It's an abomination, the third elder, Moses Yoda, spat. An affront to God's creation. Is kindness an affront to God? Jacob shot back. Is mercy, because that's all I've shown. Bishop Lapp raised a hand for silence. Jacob, you must understand our concern. The English already view us as peculiar. If they learn we're harboring whatever this creature is, it could bring persecution upon our entire community. Or, a small voice said from the doorway, it could show them what we really believe. Everyone turned to see Emma in her nightgown. Martha clutched to her chest. Emma, go back to bed, Jacob said gently. No, Dade. They need to hear this. She stepped into the room, small but fierce. Bishop Lapp, you taught us that God loves all his creatures, that we should show kindness to the least of these. Gabriel is one of God's creatures, isn't he? The bishop's expression softened. Child, some things are beyond our understanding. Then shouldn't we try to understand instead of being afraid? Emma's voice was clear, unwavering. Gabriel has been alone longer than any of us have been alive. He's never hurt anyone. He just wants a family. How is that against God? Moses Yoda scoffed. A child's foolishness. A child's wisdom. Bishop Lapp corrected quietly. He studied Emma for a long moment, then turned to Jacob. Tell me about this, Gabriel. Tell me everything. So Jacob did. He told them about finding Gabriel injured and alone, about the Washburn Journal, the story of love and loss and abandonment, about Gabriel's gentleness, his intelligence, his grief. He showed them the photographs, the children's drawings, Michael Washburn's promise to return. When he finished, the room was silent. Finally, Bishop Lapp spoke. I need to see him for myself. Tomorrow after morning prayers, alone. Bishop, Moses started, but Lapp silenced him with a gesture. Go home, all of you. Pray on this. Ask God for wisdom, not fear. He looked at Emma. And you, young one, go to bed. You've given us much to think about. After they left, Jacob found Emma crying quietly on the stairs. What if they make us send Gabriel away, she whispered. Jacob pulled her close. Then we'll find another way. I won't abandon him, Emma. Neither will you. We're his family now. Promise? Promise. But even as he made the vow, Jacob wondered how he could keep it. The next morning came too soon. Bishop Lapp arrived just as the sun broke the horizon, alone as promised. Jacob drove him to the barn in tense silence. Wait here, the bishop said when they arrived. I would speak with this Gabriel alone. Bishop, he'll be frightened. Then I will be gentle. The old man's eyes were kind but firm. Trust me, Jacob, and trust God. Jacob waited in the buggy for what felt like hours, but was probably less than one. He could hear nothing from inside the barn. No shouts, no sounds of distress, just silence. Finally, the barn door opened. Bishop Lapp emerged, moving slowly, his face unreadable. He climbed into the buggy without a word. They were halfway back to Jacob's farm before he spoke. He wept. What? When I told him I was sorry for what happened to his family, he wept. The bishop's voice was thick with emotion. No demon weeps for lost love, Jacob Miller. No abomination shows such grief. Then you'll help us? Bishop Lapp was quiet for a moment. There will be resistance. Fear, anger. Some will say I've lost my mind. But, he turned to Jacob. In all my years, I've never seen faith like what I saw in that barn. He has every reason to hate humans, yet he shows only gentleness. He could have killed me easily, yet he offered me water from his cup. If that is not God's grace made manifest, I don't know what is. So what do? We do what we should have done 60 years ago. We welcome the stranger. We show love to the least of these. and we trust that God's plan is bigger than our understanding. The bishop called a community meeting for that evening. Word spread like wildfire. By the time the sun set, the meeting house was packed, voices raised in argument before the meeting even began. Bishop Lapp called for silence. Brothers and sisters, we face a test of our faith, not from the English, not from the world, but from within our own hearts. Will we choose fear or love, judgment or mercy? He told Gabriel's story simply, without embellishment. Some listened with open hearts, others with closed minds. Moses Yorda led the opposition, quoting scripture about unclean things, about the dangers of the unknown. The debate raged for hours. Then Emma stood up. "May I say something?" The room fell silent. Children didn't speak at community meetings, but Bishop Lapp nodded. Emma walked to the front of the room, Martha in her arms. "When Mam was dying," she began, her small voice carrying clearly. "She told me something. She said the measure of a person isn't how they treat people like them, but how they treat people different from them. She said, God's love is biggest when one's is hardest." She looked around the room at faces she'd known all her life. Gabriel is different. He looks different, sounds different, but he loves like we do. He grieves like we do. He hopes like we do. And he's been alone for so long because people were afraid of different. Emma held up Martha. "My doll has no face because we believe only God can create true faces. But I love her anyway. I don't need to see her face to know she's special to me. Maybe we don't need Gabriel to look like us, to know he's one of God's creatures deserving love." She sat down in the echoing silence. Then, from the back of the room, an unexpected voice spoke up. "The child shames us all." It was old Mary Stoltzfus, the community's eldest member at 93. She stood with difficulty, leaning on her cane. "I remember the Washburns," she continued. "Good people, kind people. I remember when they started keeping to themselves, how the fear spread like sickness. I remember doing nothing when men went to their farm with torches and threats. I've carried that shame for 60 years. She looked directly at Moses Yorda. "We failed once. We drove away a family and left an innocent creature to suffer alone for 6 decades. Will we fail again, or will we finally choose love over fear?" One by one, others began to speak, some in support, some opposed. But gradually the tide turned. Stories emerged of times when the community had chosen compassion over convention, reminders of their own persecution, their own need for acceptance. Finally, Bishop Lapp called for a decision. Not a vote that wasn't their way, but a consensus of conscience. "Those who believe we should help this creature, this Gabriel, stand." Emma stood first, then Jacob, then Ruth, tears streaming down her face. Thomas, old Mary Stoltzfus. One by one, people rose until more than half the room was standing, and those opposed. Moses Yorda stood, along with perhaps 20 others. They looked around at their standing neighbors, and Jacob saw the moment when Yorda realized he'd lost. "This is a mistake," Yorda said. "You're inviting darkness into our community." "No," Bishop Lapp said gently. "We're inviting light, the light of compassion, of second chances, of love that transcends fear. That's what our faith is truly about." The meeting broke up slowly, people clustering to discuss what came next. Plans were made. A schedule was drawn up for families to visit Gabriel, to bring him food and company. The bishop himself volunteered to teach Gabriel about their faith, if he was interested. But it was what happened after the meeting that broke Jacob's heart wide open. As they prepared to leave, Emma tugged on his sleeve. "We need to tell Gabriel. He needs to know he's not alone anymore." Despite the late hour, Jacob couldn't refuse. They drove through the snowy night to the barn, Emma practically vibrating with excitement. They found Gabriel where they'd left him, huddled in his corner. But when he saw them, something in his posture changed. He'd been expecting abandonment. Instead, here they were, Gabriel, Emma said, running to him. The most wonderful thing happened. The whole community, well, most of them, they want to help. You're going to have so many friends, so many people who care. Gabriel looked at Jacob, disbelief clear in those expressive eyes. Jacob nodded, his own eyes wet. It's true, you're not alone anymore. You're part of our community now. Gabriel made a sound Jacob had never heard before. Part sob, part howl, all raw emotion. 60 years of loneliness. 60 years of waiting. 60 years of faithfully believing that someday, somehow, love would find him again. And it had. Not in the form he'd expected. Not with the family he'd lost. But with new faces, new hearts, willing to see past the surface to the soul beneath. Emma hugged him as he wept. This creature that shouldn't exist but did, this testament to faithfulness and endurance, and the power of patient love. Jacob joined them, and for a long moment, the three of them held each other in the barn that had been a prison, and was now becoming a bridge. "Welcome home," Emma whispered. "Welcome to our family." And Gabriel, who couldn't speak with words, spoke with his heart. The rumbling sound he made vibrated through them all. Gratitude, joy and love too deep for any language to capture. The snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the world in fresh white. But inside the barn, warmth bloomed. The warmth of acceptance, of belonging, of finding family in the most unexpected places. Because sometimes, Jacob thought, holding his daughter and their strange new friend, sometimes love doesn't look like what we expect. Sometimes it has claws and fur and golden eyes full of impossibly human emotion. Sometimes it waits 60 years in the dark, faithful beyond reason, hoping beyond hope. And sometimes, if we're very lucky and very brave, we get to be the ones who finally say, "You're home, you're loved, you're ours." The story of Gabriel's integration into the community would have its challenges. There would be those who never accepted him, who crossed the street when he eventually, carefully, began to venture out. But there would be more, so many more, who saw what Emma had seen from the beginning. Not a monster, but a soul deserving of love. The barn on Mossa Road had been transformed. What was once a place of isolation was now Jacob's thriving workshop, with Gabriel as his assistant. Those clever hands that had once scratched letters in dirt now worked alongside Jacob, creating furniture that was in high demand throughout the county. Emma, now 15, sat in her favorite spot in the workshop, reading aloud from one of the many books Gabriel devoured. He still couldn't speak, but he could write now, his penmanship better than most humans. "And how was school today?" Gabriel wrote on his ever-present notepad, showing it to Emma. "Good. I'm writing an essay about family for English class." She grinned. "The teacher says I can't write about you because she'll think I'm making it up." Gabriel's rumbling laugh filled the space. He wrote, "Some truths are too strange for school essays." Jacob looked up from his work, watching his daughter and their unlikely family member. The fear and uncertainty of 5 years ago seemed like another lifetime. Gabriel had become not just accepted, but beloved in their community. He attended church services, sitting in a specially reinforced pew. He helped with barn raisings, his strength making quick work of heavy beams. Children who had once hidden behind their mothers' skirts now climbed on him like a jungle gym, delighting in his patient gentleness. But it was the quiet moments Jacob treasured most. Evenings when Gabriel joined them for dinner, his place at their table as natural as breathing. Mornings when he and Emma would sit outside, Gabriel pointing out constellations that were fading with the dawn, teaching her the stars he'd studied for 60 lonely years. "Dad," Emma said suddenly, "I've been thinking about Michael Washburn." "Oh? I want to find him, or his family. They should know about Gabriel, that he's okay, that he's loved." Gabriel went very still, then wrote slowly, "He kept his promise, just not the way he thought." Emma frowned. "What do you mean?" "He promised to come back. He didn't, but he sent you instead. Both of you, my new family." Jacob had to turn away, ostensibly to check a measurement, really to wipe his eyes. Even after 5 years, Gabriel's quiet wisdom could still catch him off guard. "Gabriel," Emma said softly, "do you ever wish things had been different? That you could have stayed with the Washburn?" Gabriel considered this, then wrote, "I grieved for what was lost for 60 years. But if I had stayed with them, I would never have met you, never have learned that love can grow in the most unexpected places. The pain led to the joy. Both are part of my story." That evening, as the sun set over Lancaster County, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, the three of them stood outside the workshop. Gabriel pointed to the first stars appearing, naming them in the sign language they'd developed together. Emma translated for a group of younger children who had come to learn, their parents watching with smiles. Ruth approached, carrying a freshly baked pie. "For the stargazing party," she said, then added quietly, "To Jacob, Sarah would be so proud of you, of Emma, of all of this." Jacob nodded, his throat tight. He thought of his late wife often, especially in moments like this. How she would have loved Gabriel, would have seen past the surface to the gentle soul beneath. How she would have championed him as Emma had. As if reading his thoughts, Gabriel placed a gentle hand on Jacob's shoulder. No words were needed. The touch said everything. "Thank you, I understand. We are family." The stars came out in earnest, and Gabriel began his evening ritual of teaching the children about constellation. But tonight was special. Tonight he had Emma tell the story he'd written down, the story of a creature who waited 60 years for love to find him again, and the little girl who taught a community that different doesn't mean dangerous, that family isn't defined by blood or species but by the choice to love without conditions. As Emma's clear voice carried across the gathering, Jacob watched faces young and old, listen with rapt attention. This was their story now, all of theirs. A story of redemption and acceptance, of courage in the face of fear, of love that transcends every boundary humans try to erect. When the story ended, a small child asked, "Is it true, all of it?" Emma smiled, looking at Gabriel with eyes full of love. "Every word. And the best part, it's not over. We're still writing it, every single day." Gabriel made his rumbling sound of contentment, and one by one, the children joined in, trying to mimic it. The sound rose into the night sky, a chorus of joy and belonging that would have seemed impossible 5 years ago. And in that moment, surrounded by community and wrapped in starlight, a creature who had once waited alone in the dark knew with absolute certainty he was home, he was loved, he was family. The promises we keep aren't always the ones we intend. Sometimes they're better, sometimes they're written in the stars, in the laughter of children, in the patient work of hands both human and other building something beautiful together. Sometimes they're written in the simple revolutionary act of choosing love over fear. Every single